Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Today we're going to take a look at the Summoner Wars Alliances Master Set from Plaid Hat Games. If you're unaware, Summoner Wars is a competitive card game put out by Plaid Hat. It's actually the game that built their company and has been going strong to today. It's a game that I enjoy quite a bit, and you can watch my full review on this channel. I gave it a very glowing review. It's in my top 100. I really like it. If you don't know what it is, it was actually an LCG before LCGs were a huge thing. I think it came out at the same time that Fantasy Flight was really amping up its LCGs, in the sense that it's a competitive card game that is non-collectible. You buy little expansion packs and faction packs to add more factions into the game. The actual gameplay, while it has some common elements to a game like Magic the Gathering, where you are summoning units and you're playing some special abilities, and your units have special abilities as well, and you're trying to knock out your opponent, in this case their summoner, it actually is more of a miniatures game played with cards. You're actually placing your units out into the battlefield and manipulating and moving them around strategically like a tactical RPG. Now, what's unique about the Alliances Master Set, the original Master Set that they had, which actually came out after the original Summoner Wars set, sort of a revamping of it, had 6 different factions in it. This set has 8 factions, but they're not brand new factions. Instead, there are a total of 16 factions that have already been released throughout the history of Summoner Wars, through the original Master Set and then all of the different expansions. The Alliances set blends 2 factions together to make each faction deck in it, for a total of 8 decks in the Alliances Master Set, and they're all blends of 2 constituent factions. So there's, instead of the Jungle Elves and the Shadow Elves, you have the Jungle Shadows, and instead of the Deep Dwarves and the Benders, you have the Deep Benders. And what's interesting is that if you are into the deck building aspect of Summoner Wars, I am not, you can actually mix together cards between these different factions and between its alliance deck as well, so, you know, depending on the summoners that you're using. So it's a little more in-depth than that, and what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a look at the new stuff that comes in the game. The box is different, there's inserts, there's new mats and everything like that. We'll take a look at 4 of the 8 factions, the ones that I thought were particularly notable for good or for bad reasons. Then we're going to come back and I'll let you know what I think about all of it as a whole. Alright, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the Summoner Wars Alliances Master Set, and while this is not an unboxing video, part of the appeal of the new Alliances Master Set is the box and the insert inside of it, and some of the new goodies that it has. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now, first things first, this box has enough storage capacity to fit all of your Summoner Wars stuff. Now, I don't actually own everything Summoner Wars, as you can see. If I did, it would probably fill up maybe up to here of the rest of this row here. I have something like that. It wouldn't fill up the entire box, but I just don't have a lot of the second summoners. I have some of them, I don't have all of them, and I don't have any of the reinforcement decks because I just don't care about that. But as you can see, it can easily fit your Summoner Wars stuff, and it comes with, more importantly, in my opinion, dividers, which I love. So what I was previously having to do is just put all of my Summoner Wars cards in baggies, and there's tons of dividers. There's dividers for all of the second summoners, the original summoners, reinforcement packs, and so on. So it works really well. Each divider has a card list for that particular summoner, and the little faction symbol on the back of them. So it works really well, and of course it's got dividers for the new factions in this deck. It does come with more tokens and with more dice. These are not the total amount of tokens and dice that come with the Alliances Master Set. I just have them all mixed together from the previous Master Set, and these are new tokens that come in the Alliances set for some of their new powers. But more important to a lot of people, although I'm not entirely sure why, is the neoprene mats that come with the game. Each mat combines together to form this sort of cheesy, I'm not sure if it's post-apocalyptic or far past version of our world with North America and South America and so on. They're just neoprene mats as opposed to the board that came in the original Master Set. And I'll talk more about this in my final thoughts, but it really doesn't have any kind of functional difference. It's just easier to lay out, I guess, and looks a little bit nicer, but that's that. So let's go ahead and get to the 6 new factions that come with Alliances. Did I say 6 factions? Because obviously I meant 8. I don't know why I said that. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to give you just a brief look at 4 of the 8 factions that come in the set, because otherwise I'd be here forever. These aren't necessarily my 4 favorite factions. They're just the ones I found the most interesting, for better or for worse, and I'll talk more about that in my final thoughts. The important note here, and I'll belabor this point in the beginning and end of my video as well, but remember that all of these factions are mixed factions. That's why it's called the Alliances set. Each faction is made up of 2 constituent factions that had previously appeared in the Summoner Wars lines of products. And if you're someone that's actually into deck building, that means that you can freely swap cards between those different factions, the constituent factions and the Alliance faction cards as well, when you're constructing a deck. There's some exceptions to that. I don't really want to get into it because it's not something that I'm into and haven't really done myself, but that is an important thing for competitive players and people who really want to make incredibly strong decks out of all of these constituent parts. So first off, we're going to take a look at the Fallen Phoenix. This is the Summoner Immortal Hellion, who is actually, some of these summoners for the factions are completely new, I believe. In fact, I think most of them are. But Hellion was Prince Hellion with the original Phoenix Elves faction. So this is just like a new version of him. And his ability, Hellion's Will, is pretty neat because it means that he, after you get done with your attack phase, you can spend up to 3 magic points to add 1 to some of the dice rolls, which can be very, very powerful, but it does mean you need to spend magic points on that. So let's take a look at some of the champions now. You have, I forgot how bad the font is on this, but you have Helkar, leader of the cult. When attacking with a cultist you control that is adjacent to Helkar, you can add 1 to its attack value during that attack. After moving Helkar, you may place a wound marker on her Helkar to place a cultist you control adjacent to her. That's why she has so many wounds she can potentially take, and why her combat value doesn't start off all that high. Now, Carthous here has a special ability where he can actually, instead of attacking with him, you can instead take one of your common units out of an opponent's discard pile. In other words, common units that your opponent killed before and had used for magic, and bring it onto the battlefield adjacent. You do need to still pay the summoning cost, but the benefit of this is that they have the precise ability until the end of turn, which the precise ability meaning that they just hit. They don't have to roll dice. For every die they would roll, they just do an automatic hit and deal a wound. And then finally, of course, you have a dragon, specifically the Hellfire Drake, which means that his special ability, instead of attacking with the Hellfire Drake, you can just put a wound marker on every unit adjacent to him, which might actually be bad for you depending on where the rest of your units are. Here's the common units. Warrior, who has the ability after his attack, he can actually instantly teleport adjacent to another Fallen Phoenix unit. The Cultist, when you're attacking with him, if one die had a 6 or higher, you can choose to place 2 wound markers on the Cultist, and each time you do that, you get to put an additional wound marker on the person that you're attacking. Something like that, anyways. Here's a really interesting one. A friend of mine said that it reminded him of one of the X-Men Chamber. Harbinger gets to, whenever you're attacking a unit, after you destroy a unit, you can immediately roll a die, and if it's a 4 or higher, you get to put a conjuration onto the battlefield, and that is the conjuration. These stay off to the side of the battlefield. You use them whenever it applies. In this case, it's a burning skeleton. So essentially, the unit you just destroyed turns into a burning skeleton that you were able to use. And his magic burn ability is that when he is destroyed, you roll a die. If the die roll comes up in your favor, then you're actually, the opponent does not get to put them into his magic pile. Instead, it goes straight back to the conjuration pile. And here's a couple of the event abilities for the Immortal Hellion deck. You have Force Conversion that lets you sacrifice a cultist in order to take temporary control of an enemy unit, and that unit gets the precise ability, auto hits, until the end of turn. And then you have Purge, which is simply blow up one of your units and put a wound marker on every adjacent unit. Now, let's move on to one of the other decks. Alright, let's take a look at the Deep Benders. This is a mix of the Deep Dwarves and the Benders from the original Master set, which were 2 of the most difficult to use factions, but 2 that I liked quite a bit, especially the Deep Dwarves. They're really tough to pull off, but I really liked them for that reason, I guess. The Summoner is Endrich here, and he's pretty cool because the whole thing about this deck is manipulating, just like the Benders do, manipulating the other units and boosting them, which I'll get to in a second. But Endrich's ability, essentially after the attack phase, you can spend a magic point to make another one of your common units attack again, even if that person had already attacked. That's pretty powerful. Here's the champions. This is my favorite, of course, the Giant Owl Griffin. Instead of attacking with both the Owl Griffin and your Summoner this turn, you can remove a card from the top of your discard pile and place it on top of your magic pile. So essentially, potentially giving yourself some free magic. Then you have another one of the champions. You have Kendre. You have Redistribute. After moving with Kendre, you may choose a boosted unit you control within 3 spaces of Kendre. Remove the boost marker from the chosen unit and place it on any other unit that can be boosted. And the boost markers are something I showed you during the little short unboxing that I had. It's another one of the tokens that comes with the game. Then you have Kyodol here. Geopathic Charge. At the beginning of your attack phase, you must spend 1 magic point for each common unit that is adjacent to Kyodol. If you cannot, discard Kyodol. Common units you control add 1 to their attack value when adjacent to Kyodol. Then here's some of the commons. You have the Gem Priestess. Now, when she is boosted, then which is a cost of 2, essentially you can spend magic points when she comes onto the battlefield in order to have her get boosted. And in this case, if you boost her, you spend 2 magic points and put 2 boost markers on her. She gains 2 extra life in addition to the 2 that she has, makes her harder to kill. She could also potentially be able to remove wound markers from other units. Then you have the Geopath. His boost cost is just 1. When boosted, you get to increase his attack value, and when attacking with him, you can attack up to 5 clear straight lines away, which can be very powerful. The Deep Dragon, when you boost the Deep Dragon to 2, his life gets an additional 2 as well, and when moving with him, you can move 1 additional space. Then you have Conjuration. This is just like the Immortal Alien deck. Some cards are going to let you bring out Conjurations. The Conjuration for this deck is the Gorgon, who has 1 attack power, but more importantly, if any unit starts your turn adjacent to a Gorgon, then those units automatically die. Common units, of course. Then here's some of his event cards. You have Reclaim, which lets you essentially to take any number of units that you already have boosted, remove the markers from them, and then remove a number of cards from your discard pile equal to the boost cost of the chosen units and place them on top of your magic pile. So you can, all those cards that you use to boost, them, you can put back into your magic pile just by taking those boost markers back when it's most convenient for you. And Unlock, that's going to let you automatically boost some units that you already have on the battlefield who were not originally boosted. Now let's look at the Cavefilth. Alright, the Cavefilth is made up of the Cave Goblins and the Filth, which is like the evil kind of deck that's made up of all different sorts of mutations. But the important thing about the Cavefilth is that they have a new mechanic which is called having a prison pile. Most of the cards that you have are prisoners, or the cards that you take that instead would be magic instead become prisoners, and you have a separate pile called the prison pile. So that's essentially what all of the Warden's text here says is instead of putting things in your magic pile, you put them into your prison pile, but then you'll have an opportunity to put 1 card into your magic pile from the prison pile every round, but you'll use those prisoners in order to boost your abilities. And you'll notice that since he doesn't really have any killer ability on his own, he has a lot of life points. He has all of his life points filled up, and he only does have 1 attack, however. So then let's look at the champions. The Soul Eater is, well, we'll talk about that in my final thoughts, but very powerful. Essentially, he can start killing automatically common units he's adjacent to. In fact, if you don't, you have to start devouring your own prisoner pile instead. Hester has 0 attack, which means he would probably be terrible, right? Except that he gets 1 to his attack value for every 2 cards that are in your prison pile, which means he can be very powerful if you're doing it right. Scabicus has a Revolt ability. He receives whenever he receives 1 or more wound markers from an attack or an opponent's card effect, discard a card from your prison pile. If you cannot, add an additional wound marker to Scabicus. So he's got sort of a high cost to him, although he is very powerful. Only a couple of common units in this deck. You have the Taskmaster, who can essentially whip the prisoners. And by the way, I should mention that there was a typo on the setup card for this deck that says slaves. They were originally called slaves. I'll talk more about that as well. But the Taskmaster can whip the prisoners and get them to move an additional spot so long as they get a bonus to their attack power, although they'll take a wound as well. And there's the prisoners, by the way. They have a summoning cost of 0, but they are unwilling. So if you have to roll a die when you summon them. If it comes up as 3 or less, you put them in their prison pile instead, which still might benefit you. And of course, because this deck is associated with the Filth, there are mutations. In fact, these cards have their back is actually the Filth back instead of the Cavefilth backs, meaning because you can never use these cards in a Cave Goblin deck, you can only use them in the Cavefilth deck or the Filth deck. This is just one example. There's like 5 or 6 of the mutation cards in this game, but you have the Legion Mutant, which is that when you summon him, you can spend up to 4 magic points to place that number of cards from your prison pile underneath him, and he'll gain that many attack powers. Although if other effects are giving him, and also life power as well, but if other effects are giving him more life and more attack, it can never be more than 5. Then here's a couple of the event cards. You have Overwork. You can choose a common unit you control and immediately move it up to 2 spaces and attack with that unit, and also add 1 to his attack value, kind of like the Taskmaster's ability, just a little bit more powerful. But after resolving the attack, or if no attack is made, you place the chosen unit into your prison pile. You've essentially overworked him. And then Living Shield, which means that all Cavefilth units you control gain the following ability. Whenever 1 or more wound markers will be placed on that card, you can discard 1 card from your prison pile to ignore the wounds. Now, the last one we're going to take a look at is the Sand Cloaks. All right, finally, we're going to look at what, I'll just go ahead and tell you. This is my favorite deck of the set because I already liked, I actually haven't played the Cloaks. I think I own the Cloaks deck, but I haven't actually played as it. But I love the Sand Goblins, so I was really looking forward to trying this deck, and I wasn't disappointed. This whole deck, the Merrick Summoners deck, is all about equipping your characters with these event abilities. And because it's a Sand Cloaks deck, I actually feel like the cards represent equipment to some degree, or at least training. So Merrick's special ability here as a summoner, she gets to, if she has an event ability attached to her, she can have 1 other unit on the battlefield have that ability. She can essentially share that ability with another unit. Looking at the champions, you have Bobble, and Bobble's special ability is that he can actually, if he has event abilities on him, he can discard them in order to ignore damage. You have Barson. What Barson can do is that after you get done attacking with him, you can move another common unit that's near him. And this goes hand in hand with like the Sand Goblins special abilities, which are manipulating the battlefield, moving around it as quickly as possible. Then you have Fink, who's pretty interesting, although you're not going to really understand what he does for a second, but he can essentially, or how powerful he is for a second, he can copy a unit that is close to him and essentially use all of that unit's event abilities and powers that they have. Now let's look at the common units. The Tinker is probably the worst of them for sure. His ability is just that he can cancel out another unit's power, which can sometimes be very useful, but in my opinion, not necessarily for the cost associated with him. The Scholars are also very selectively useful, although it makes sense with their deck. What they can do is they can remove event abilities that you've already placed on characters on the battlefield at the end of the event phase, but then you can also spend a magic point to fetch one of them out of the discard pile. Event abilities will never go into an opponent's magic pile if that unit's been destroyed. They only take the unit, not the event ability. And then this is actually the centerpiece of the deck, in my opinion. The Hunter common unit. What they have is that when they have an event ability on them, first and foremost, they gain a +1 to their attack power, but more importantly, every other hunter on the battlefield has that same event ability. They share event abilities no matter where they are, which can be very, very powerful and combo very nicely, and you definitely want to have Fink copy one of the hunters. And speaking of those events abilities, let's take a look at a couple of them because those are what all the event cards are. Camouflage is clearly the best. What it means is that so long as any person has the camouflage ability, they cannot be attacked by non-adjacent units. Ranged effects become useless against them. You have to get in close, which can be devastating against certain decks. And then the Swift ability, just another example. And all of the event abilities in this deck are unique, actually. But the Swift ability just means that those units can move an extra space on their turn, which can be very good. So that's just 4 of the factions that come in this set. Without belaboring the point, let's go ahead and get to my final thoughts. So first off, I wanted to start off with just some general thoughts about Summoner Wars. And yes, I already did a review of Summoner Wars as a whole with my original Master Set review, but I actually hadn't played the game in quite a while. Now, but around the time that I did my original review, I played the game a lot, and then I just kind of fell by the wayside. So it was interesting to jump back into the game after a while with sort of a fresh set of eyes on it after having played so many other different types of games, a lot of competitive card games as well. And also, I played the Alliances set with other people who were new to Summoner Wars completely. So to see their reactions to the game, to just the Alliances set as compared to the original Master Set was interesting as well. And here's a few of the things. Now, and these are, well, first off, I'll just say this. I still love the game. I still love it. I still think it's great. I still think that it blows a lot of other LCGs out of the water. I'm still on the fence as to whether or not it's, for me, whether it's better or worse than Magic. I don't like the collectible aspect of Magic, but I think Magic is a much more solid game. But I still love Summoner Wars, still solidly in my top 100. But a few things I noticed that are definitely negatives. And I by the way, I am going to say that the Alliances set, Master Set is great, okay? It's really great. Maybe not as good, in my opinion, just in general as the original Master Set, but still a fantastic set. So let me get that out of the way. But I do want to, you know, you got to take the bad with the good sometimes. And I think that there's a few things that I have noticed over time with Summoner Wars that came back into stark contrast when I played this new Master Set. One of them is that the lore of this game is kind of terrible and not fleshed out enough at all. And maybe it's because I have kind of been getting back into Magic a little bit, and Magic, and I know that people hate it when these two games are compared. People who love Summoner Wars hate it. But Magic has such a glorious, fleshed out multiverse of characters and universes to the benefit of Wizards of the Coast. They do that so that people buy more of their product and buy more of the merchandise associated with the game. But regardless of what the reasons are, it's such a wonderful, just like universe of possibilities and storylines and plot lines all interconnected between all the different blocks and sets that they put out. I don't feel any of that from Summoner Wars. I know there's some backstory. You can go on their website and get some little snippets of the story, but none of it feels cohesive. A lot of it feels just sort of like tongue-in-cheek and kind of like they're trying to be funny, like with the names of some of the characters. And like maybe the original war was like this and I never noticed, but when I saw the new neoprene mats, they have like the map of the world, and it's just supposed to be like our world, either in the far future or like post-apocalyptic, or maybe in the far past. I don't know, or just alternate universe. But there's like North Merrick and South Merrick. I just find that kind of silly and jarring. Like some of the decks seem really serious. Like the Cavefilth deck with, you know, masters and slaves, or I'm sorry, prisoners. And then you've got kind of this silly tone to it and kind of feels derivative. So I'm kind of disappointed in that. I hadn't really realized how uninspiring the whole storyline of Summoner Wars was before. And then a couple of other things of note. The time of the game can be very swingy. I think I did point this out in my original review. You can have games of Summoner Wars that are over in a few rounds. Someone just gets really lucky with their dice rolls, and I'll get back to that in a second. Or someone just makes some power play, the factions don't match up completely evenly, or someone's just clearly much better than the other player. Because you can definitely be an expert at Summoner Wars, and you just fly through, kill their summoner very, very quickly, and the game is over in less than a half hour. Or the game drags out almost interminably to 60 minutes, 70 minutes, 80 minutes, and it gets down to where both players run out of cards in their deck, and it's just a war of attrition, just pounding away at each other until someone finally gets lucky, breaks through, and kills their summoner. So that can feel a bit uneven as well. And then the last thing I'll point out is that the luck in this game was something that took the new players that I played with completely by shock. They were like, wow, I really thought this was a tactical game where their strategy was key, and if I make the right moves, a better winner will clearly win. And while I think a better winner will clearly win on average, sometimes you can have a fantastic strategy and the dice are just not with you. You get 66% of the time without any mitigation, you're going to win that roll. That means that, you know, 34% of the time you are just going to fail miserably. And that is a really, really horrible feeling when everything else was going right for you, and it can really mean the difference between you winning or losing, and that can be frustrating. And I guess I didn't really have that happening to me too much, but again, it was by luck. I was lucky, and I really felt for the people I was playing against. I'm like, wow, I hope this doesn't leave a bad taste in their mouth because of that. And I know to change that would fundamentally change the game, but I wonder if that's a serious flaw that maybe I hadn't recognized as much of earlier. But that's my general thoughts on Summoner Wars. Now, anyways, you're here for the Alliances review. Let's talk about that. We'll get that bad stuff out of the way. Overall, like I said, this is a great set. I still think the original Master set might be better. I know that it has 2 less decks. It doesn't have the nice neoprene mats, for whatever, you know, who cares? And it's not as big a box, but still, those sets are more straightforward. I think they're easier for new players. Well, let me say that. If you're new to the game, go for the original Master set. Because some of these decks are a little more complex. Clearly, they've had, you know, 16 other decks and second summoners and reinforcement cards. They've gone through a lot of different iterations of the game, And so a lot of the abilities, some of the abilities in the Alliances set are very, very straightforward in how the cards work, but some of them are a little more complex. So I think the original Master Set is the way to go if you're new to the game. And then if you really love it, eventually you'll move on to the Alliances set, and I think that you'll be very happy because there's a lot of interesting stuff here. Talking about the components of the game, I like the bigger box. I love having the new little insert cards for all of the dividers is what I'm looking for all the different decks. That's like the best part about it. I don't need all the extra space yet because I don't have anywhere near as much Summoner War stuff as there is out there, but I like having the dividers because I hated putting my decks in bags. So that's a huge plus. The neoprene mats are fine. I just don't totally understand what was wrong with the old board, but I'm guessing it was cheaper. I think that it's probably cheaper to make the neoprene mats at this point. If that's the case, that's fine. And they're good mats. There's no creases in mine, at least. I know that other mats that I've had in other games like Cube Quest are horribly bent and creased and almost unusable unless you lay them out for a while. These didn't have that problem as long as you curl them up properly, so that's cool. So component-wise, and the art is still very solid. They used some another artist, Cupid's art, someone they work with, and it looks really good. So there's a mixture of the two traditional styles of art, and so it looks really decent. Almost all the art, and I'll get back to that, is pretty solid. As far as the individual decks themselves, and I've played as each of the decks or played against each of the decks. I would have had to play, I didn't want to play that many times. In some decks I wanted to get multiple plays in, so some of the decks I only played against, not as, but I experienced them all and what their different special abilities were, and some of them I like better than others, but for the most part, almost all of them are really good. My absolute two favorites, and I talked about this in the overview, are the Sand Cloaks and the Deep Benders. And which isn't much of a surprise. I never played as the Cloaks, I don't think. I think I own the deck. I'm blanking for some reason. I don't think I played as the original Cloaks. But I have played as the Sand Goblins and the Benders and the Deep Dwarves previously, and those are three of my favorite decks. So it's no surprise that I would like these decks because a lot of those abilities, the same abilities they had, carry over and are added on. And those decks were kind of more difficult to use. The Sand Goblins were always about manipulating the battlefield, moving around quickly, and the Benders and the Deep Dwarves were all about the long game, sort of manipulating and controlling your opponents and boosting yourselves and using magic points in a very creative way, rather than just going for the biggest, baddest champion and bringing them out. That might not always be the best case. And that's really on display with these two new Alliances faction decks as well. So the whole thing with when I played Magic the Gathering, speaking of that, I really loved building an equipment deck, and that's what the Sand Cloaks make me think of. You're putting equipment on your characters. There's other decks in this set that do that, like the Tundra Guild, but it really works well with those Hunters. The Hunters are the centerpiece, I think, upwards above of any of the champions, or even the Summoner. And one of the games I played with the Sand Cloaks, my Summoner sat there like a lump and didn't do anything, only used her special ability like one time. But my Hunters were flitting about the battlefield, using all the different special abilities. It's amazing. It felt so cool. I really enjoyed that deck. And one of their champions is great, the one that gets to copy another one, because then you just copy one of your Hunters that has 4 abilities on it, and you're like, yeah, it's amazing. So really, really love the Sand Cloaks deck. And the Deep Benders deck as well. Now, that's interesting because I played once as the Deep Benders and once against the Deep Benders. And the first time it was against the Deep Benders, and I saw the friend I was playing with who had played before was sort of like not figuring out the deck, and like, yeah, I don't know. And then as play went on and it got deeper in, I was like, okay, yeah, now I'm getting the best way to do this and boosting and how I should be using my Summoner's ability. And it's just like the original Deep Dwarves and Benders decks. It takes you a minute, like, to utilize them in the best way. And I really like that ramping up. I like the whole thing about getting to add more magic into your pile from the discard pile. The Griffin champion, or not the owl, is it Owl Griffin, or that big owl? Really love those. So I really love the flavor of that deck. Other decks in the set are good. I kind of call them like workhorse decks. They don't do anything like amazingly different or unique, but they're still solid. The Immortal Alien Fallen Phoenix deck, I feel like it might be just a tiny bit underpowered, but it's still interesting. I love the whole idea of blowing up your units, and then the Harbinger being able to bring out the burning skeletons is really neat thematically, and I do love the precise ability. Also, the decks like the Jungle Shadows and the Vargath Vanguard, or the Vargath Vanguard, silly names. Those decks are solid. They feel very, very similar to their constituent deck, so they're nothing particularly noteworthy, but they're not bad either. I never liked the Swamp Orcs. So the Swamp Orc mercenaries are not particularly, Swamp mercenaries are just not particularly interesting to me. I don't like the whole vine wall thing. It's just an extra level of complexity that I think is kind of fiddly and kind of pointless. So, not pointless, but it's just not for me. But they're fine. If you like them, that's okay. The one deck I have a huge problem with in this set, I guess I've been building up to this, is the Cavefilth. I think the Cavefilth is by far the worst deck in the set, and in my opinion, of the ones that I've played, and I have not played every single deck of Summoner Wars total, it's my least favorite deck by far. I like the original Filth, and the Cave Goblins, the original Cave Goblins were okay. I think I remember playing as them and not really having a strong opinion one way or the other. But the Cavefilth is awful. I hate the theme of the deck. I hate that it's like a warden beating prisoners, although they left, kind of stupidly, they left the slave on the slave word on the setup card, but mercifully they had the foresight to not actually call all the cards slaves and call them prisoners instead. I don't even know who thought that was a great idea to begin with, or maybe it was a joke in the beginning. But yeah, I don't like the theme of the deck. I think it's a weird unbalanced thing where the whole mechanic of the prisoner pile in and of itself and trying to bring out prisoners and the Taskmaster is all very weak and not that useful, and your Warden just sort of sits there like a lump with a lot of life. But then you have mutation cards and this champion, the Soul Eater, who are like amazingly powerful if you can get them out, and they just dominate the battlefield. And it's like, well, it's this really bad lack of balance, lack of theme. I don't even like the artwork on this particular deck that much. All these things conspire together to make it my least favorite deck by far. I know there's probably some people who will disagree with me because I've already seen some comments on message boards about the interesting interactions in that deck. I don't find that to be so. I did not like it. I played as it. I played against it. In neither case did I like it. So there's probably the darkest spot of my review of the Alliances set as a whole. But otherwise, I think it's a very good and interesting set. Well, let me say this though too, again, and I mentioned this kind of in my overview, I don't do the deck building thing in Summoner Wars. So you could make an argument that I miss out on a good chunk of the game because I'm not willing to take apart decks and mix them together, especially since Alliances really opens that up by letting you mix all these different factions together now. But I still think that there's so much variety that even if you're like me and you're casual and you don't like building decks, there's so many different decks to play as, especially if you have both master sets, that it's like you'll never get bored. You would never need to build your own decks unless you were playing competitively. So I still like it quite a bit, other than the Cavefilth deck and other than some of the more glaring issues that Summoner Wars has, that I've noticed in Summoner Wars over time that I mentioned in the beginning of this. Other than that, really, really solid. Still love the game. Go for the original Master set if you're new, but then you'll definitely want to pick up the Alliances set eventually if you really like the game, because it is solid. That is the Summoner Wars Alliances Master set from Plaid Hat Games.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.